Sometimes love finds you when you have nothing left to give. Sometimes it remembers you from a time when you had everything to lose. David Thompson sat in his car, counting his last $5. His daughter needed shoes, rent was overdue, but here he was, about to spend everything on a first date. The fancy restaurant made him feel small in his thrift store suit. Inside, a woman in white turned toward him. Her eyes widened with recognition. This was Evelyn, the quiet girl he'd protected from bullies in high school before his family moved away. Now she wore diamonds and success like a crown. But those same gentle eyes that once looked at him with gratitude were staring at him now. She remembered him. The question was, would she remember the boy who stood up for her when nobody else would? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning alarm never had a chance to ring. David Thompson's eyes opened at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before the clock would have jarred him awake, the same way they had every morning for the past 2 years. His body had learned the rhythm of necessity. Wake before the world demands it. Squeeze every moment from the day before exhaustion claims you again. He lay still for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of their apartment building coming to life. Mrs. Rodriguez, upstairs, was already moving around her kitchen, the gentle scrape of her morning routine filtering through thin walls. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried briefly before being comforted. These sounds had become his symphony, the proof that life continued even when your own felt suspended in amber. The chain around his neck had shifted during sleep, and he felt the familiar weight of Sarah's wedding ring against his chest. 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days since cancer had taken her. He still wore his own ring on his finger. Removing it felt like erasing her entirely, and he wasn't ready for that kind of forgetting. David pushed himself up and padded quietly to the kitchen, careful not to wake Emma. Their apartment was small, a one-bedroom where Emma had claimed the bedroom, and he made do with the couch that folded out into something resembling a bed. The morning light through their single window revealed everything at once: the stack of bills on the counter, the nearly empty refrigerator humming with effort, the coffee can where he counted coins for Emma's school lunch money, but it also revealed the drawings covering their refrigerator. Emma's artwork transformed their humble space into something magical. There was the one of them as superheroes, him with impossibly broad shoulders and her flying beside him with a cape made of rainbow colors. Another showed their family of 3, him, Emma, and Sarah with angel wings, all holding hands under a smiling sun. Emma never forgot to include her mother. He started the coffee, measuring the grounds carefully. Sarah used to tease him about his precision with everything, but precision was what kept them afloat now. Every dollar had a purpose, every decision carried weight. "Daddy?" Emma's voice came soft from the bedroom doorway. 8 years old, but her eyes held understanding that children shouldn't need to carry. "You're up early again. Just wanted to make sure we had time for a good breakfast," he said, pulling her into a hug that smelled like sleep and the strawberry shampoo they bought in bulk. "How did my brave girl sleep?" "I dreamed about Mommy again." Emma settled at their small table, legs swinging from the chair. "She said you looked sad lately and that maybe you should try to make new friends." David's hand stilled on the coffee pot. Emma's dreams about Sarah had become less frequent, but when they came, they carried an eerie wisdom that left him unsettled. "Did she now?" "She said grown-ups need grown-up friends, not just me." Emma traced patterns on the table with her finger. "I told her you have friends at the garage, but she said that's different. She said you need someone who sees you the way she used to." The coffee finished brewing with a soft gurgle. David poured himself a cup, using the silence to compose himself. Sarah had always been the social one, drawing people into their orbit with her easy laugh and genuine interest in others. After she died, he'd retreated into the smaller world of work and Emma, finding it safer to love fewer people. "What do you think about that, sweetheart?" Emma considered this with the seriousness she applied to all important matters. "I think Mommy's right. You get lonely when you think I'm not looking." And Mrs. Rodriguez says lonely people forget how to smile properly. David nearly choked on his coffee. Mrs. Rodriguez, their neighbor, had appointed herself an unofficial grandmother to Emma and an unwelcome advisor to him. Mrs. Rodriguez says a lot of things. She says you're too handsome to waste away like old fruit. Emma giggled at this, and the sound unlocked something tight in David's chest. She says if she was 40 years younger, you'd be in trouble. I'm definitely in trouble, David muttered. But he was smiling now. They moved through their morning routine with practiced efficiency. Emma helped pack her lunch, peanut butter sandwich, an apple and juice box, while David ironed his work uniform. The iron was older than Emma, a wedding gift from Sarah's mother that had outlasted its giver. Everything in their life had stories attached, memories that made simple objects precious. "Daddy, I need new shoes soon," Emma said, not looking up from her backpack. "These ones have a hole, but I've been putting tape inside so you don't worry." David's hand stilled on the iron. He'd noticed her walking differently, favoring her left foot, but he'd hoped it was just a phase. "Let me see." Emma lifted her foot and David's heart clenched. The sole had separated completely from the upper, held together by layers of duct tape applied with 8-year-old ingenuity. She'd been walking on cardboard and hope. "Sweetheart, why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you get that worried face when things cost money," Emma said matter-of-factly. "And Mrs. Rodriguez says worried faces give you wrinkles." David knelt beside her chair, taking her small foot in his hands. The shoes were beyond repair, had been for weeks. "We'll get you new ones this weekend, okay? I promise." Where will the money come from? The question hung between them, heavy with the weight of all the questions 8-year-olds shouldn't need to ask. David thought of the $27 in his wallet, the bills on the counter, the rent due in 5 days. "I'll figure it out," he said, and meant it. He always figured it out, even when the solutions required pieces of himself he wasn't sure he could spare. After dropping Emma at school, David drove to Thompson's Auto Repair, the shop he'd inherited from his father, along with its debts and fading reputation. The morning was crisp, promising a clear October day, and for a moment he allowed himself to remember when mornings held possibility instead of obligation. 3 years ago, when Sarah was still fighting, the shop had been thriving. David had dreams then, expanding, maybe teaching automotive repair at the community college, building something lasting for Emma. But cancer treatments cost more than insurance covered, and dreams became sacrifices made quietly in hospital waiting rooms. Now the shop survived on a rotation of loyal customers and his reputation for honest work. He charged less than his competitors because he knew what it felt like to count every dollar. And he slept better, knowing Mrs. Peterson could afford to keep her car running, even if it meant he couldn't afford new shoes for his daughter. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and Marcus looked up from the early morning paperwork. Marcus had worked for David's father and stayed through the transition, a steady presence who never asked uncomfortable questions about late paychecks or reduced hours. "Morning, boss. Got 3 cars lined up already, and Mrs. Patterson called about her transmission again." "Good morning, Marcus. How's Linda feeling?" David poured himself a second cup of coffee from the pot Marcus always started early. "Better. Thanks for asking. And thanks for—" Marcus gestured vaguely at the envelope on the desk. Last week's paycheck that David had somehow managed, despite his own empty wallet. Don't mention it. They worked in comfortable silence, the familiar rhythm of diagnosis and repair, providing a meditation David had learned to cherish. His hands moved with practiced confidence, solving problems with tangible solutions. Cars didn't require emotional navigation or impossible choices between rent and shoes. They just needed patient attention and the right parts. Around noon, Marcus brought up the subject David had been dreading. "Boss, I hate to ask, but Linda's doctor wants her to see a specialist. The insurance will cover most of it, but take what you need," David said without looking up from the engine he was rebuilding. "Family comes first, but the shop's budget will survive." "It always does." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of what wasn't being said. They both knew the shop's margins, knew that David's generosity came from his own pocket more often than not. But they also knew that some things mattered more than profit margins. The afternoon brought a steady stream of customers, each carrying their own stories of mechanical failure and financial juggling. David listened to them all, offering payment plans and creative solutions, remembering when Sarah used to tease him about running a charity instead of a business. "You can't save everyone," she'd said. But her eyes had been proud. "I can try," he'd answered. And she kissed him for it at 6 o'clock. David locked up the shop and drove to Emma's after-school program. She bounded toward the car with the resilience of childhood, chattering about her day while David navigated traffic and calculated whether they had enough gas to last until payday. "Daddy, Mrs. Henderson says there's a parent-teacher conference next week. She wants to talk to you about something good." Emma buckled her seatbelt with the ceremony 8-year-olds applied to important tasks. "And she says I'm reading above grade level like Mommy used to." Pride swelled in David's chest, the kind that made everything else seem manageable. Emma was thriving despite their circumstances, her spirit unbroken by the challenges that kept David awake at night. "Sarah would be proud. That's wonderful, sweetheart. We'll definitely go to the conference. Would you wear your nice shirt? The blue one that makes your eyes look like the ocean." David glanced in the rearview mirror at Emma's expectant face. The blue shirt had been Sarah's favorite, purchased for occasions that seemed to belong to another lifetime. "If you think I should." "I do. Mrs. Henderson is really pretty, and Mrs. Rodriguez says pretty ladies notice when men make an effort. Mrs. Rodriguez has a lot of opinions about my social life. She says you're wasting your good years hiding." Emma's voice carried the sing-song quality of repeated adult conversations. "She says Mommy wouldn't want you to be lonely forever." David pulled into their apartment complex parking lot, using the moment to gather his thoughts. These conversations with Emma had become more frequent lately, her 8-year-old wisdom cutting through his defenses with surgical precision. "What do you think about that?" he asked, turning to face her. Emma considered this seriously, her small face scrunched in concentration. "I think Mommy loved you enough to want you to be happy. And I think maybe she sent someone nice to find us. But you have to be looking for them to see them." That evening, after Emma had finished her homework and they'd shared their simple dinner, David found himself staring at his laptop screen. The dating profile he'd created weeks ago at Emma's insistence stared back at him, incomplete and abandoned. "Daddy, are you going to finish that?" Emma had appeared beside him in her pajamas, ready for their nightly reading ritual. "I don't know, sweetheart. It feels scary." "Yeah, scary." Emma climbed onto his lap, her small weight grounding him to the present moment. "Mommy used to say that scary things are just exciting things wearing disguises." David looked at the profile, at the carefully chosen photo that hid the exhaustion in his eyes, at the description that mentioned his love of family and fixing things but omitted the financial struggles and sleepless nights. Was he ready to let someone see the real him, the version that counted dollars and worried about rent? "What if someone thinks less of us because we don't have much money?" he asked, voicing the fear that kept him paralyzed. Emma twisted in his lap to look at him directly. "Then they're not very smart, are they? Because we have lots of love, and love is the most expensive thing there is." 20 minutes later, after Emma had fallen asleep to the sound of him reading Charlotte's Web for the dozenth time, David returned to the laptop. He filled in the remaining fields with honest simplicity, uploaded the photo, and hovered over the submit button. Sarah's ring pressed against his chest as he leaned forward, a reminder of love that had been real and true and worth the risk. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe Mommy had sent someone to find them, but he had to be brave enough to look. He clicked submit and closed the laptop, not ready to see if anyone would respond to a single father with more heart than money. But for the first time in months, the apartment felt less like a place where they were hiding and more like a place where they were waiting for something good to begin. 3 days after submitting his profile, David's phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. The notification appeared while he was under the hood of Mrs. Patterson's sedan, and he almost ignored it entirely. Eve Claire, your profile caught my attention. Would you like to meet for dinner tomorrow evening? I know a quiet place downtown. David stared at the message, grease-stained fingers hesitating over the screen. The profile photo showed a woman with kind eyes and an elegant smile, but it was the simplicity of her message that intrigued him. No games, no lengthy back and forth, just direct honesty. He typed back, I'd like that. Fair warning, though, I'm better with car engines than restaurant etiquette. Her response came quickly. Authenticity is more attractive than etiquette. Shall we say 7 o'clock at Chez Laurent on 5th Street? David's heart sank as he Googled the restaurant. Chez Laurent was the kind of place where entrees cost more than he spent on groceries in a week. But something about her directness, combined with Emma's recent encouragement, made him type, I'll see you there. That evening, he stood before his closet's meager contents with growing panic. The blue shirt Emma loved was wrinkled. His only decent pants had a small stain, and his shoes bore the scuffs of a man who worked with his hands. He ironed everything twice, used a dab of toothpaste to clean the stain, and polished his shoes until they gleamed. Emma supervised from his bed, offering commentary with 8-year-old authority. You look nervous, Daddy. I am nervous. Mrs. Rodriguez says nervous means you care about something. Mrs. Rodriguez says a lot of things. David adjusted his tie for the 5th time. How do I look? Emma studied him seriously. Like a daddy who deserves something good. The drive to Chez Laurent gave David too much time to think. The restaurant glowed against the evening darkness, all warm light and expensive cars in the valet parking. He parked 3 blocks away, walking past storefronts that reminded him of the world he'd stepped away from when Sarah got sick. Inside, the maitre d' took one look at David's carefully assembled outfit and hesitated just long enough to make him feel exposed. Do you have a reservation, sir? I'm meeting someone. Table for Thompson? Ah, yes, Miss Claire's guest. Right this way. They wove through tables filled with couples who belonged here, past conversations conducted in low, cultured tones. David felt like an actor who'd forgotten his lines, playing a role in someone else's story, and then he saw her. She sat at a corner table, elegant in a way that seemed effortless, reading something on her phone with the kind of focus David recognized in people who ran their own worlds. Her dark hair was pulled back, revealing a face that was both familiar and impossible. When she looked up and their eyes met, David's world tilted on its axis. Recognition flickered across her features, surprise, then something deeper. She stood slowly, and David felt 15 years disappear in the space between heartbeats. David Thompson. Her voice carried the same gentle quality he remembered, though it now held notes of confidence that hadn't been there in high school. I thought it might be you, Evelyn Chen. The name came out as barely a whisper. I can't believe, how long has it been? 15 years. Since your family moved away senior year. She gestured to the chair across from her. Please sit. This is quite a surprise. David sank into the chair, his mind reeling. This was Evelyn, the quiet girl from AP English, who sat in the back row and never spoke unless called upon. The girl who ate lunch alone until David started sitting with her, drawn by something in her eyes that spoke of hidden depths. But this woman bore only traces of that shy teenager. Success emanated from her like warmth from a fire. Expensive clothes worn with casual grace, confident posture, the kind of understated jewelry that whispered rather than shouted about wealth. David struggled for words that wouldn't reveal his shock. You look incredible. Life has been good to you. Thank you. Evelyn's smile was careful, controlled. You look exactly the same. A little older, maybe more tired, but the same kind eyes. The waiter appeared with practiced discretion. Good evening. May I start you with something to drink? Evelyn glanced at David, clearly deferring to him, but David found himself drowning in the wine list's intimidating prices. Just water for me, thanks. I'll have the same, Evelyn said smoothly. And perhaps we could have a few more minutes with the menu? When they were alone again, silence stretched between them, filled with 15 years of unasked questions. David fidgeted with his napkin, hyper-aware of every gesture in this place where he clearly didn't belong. "So," Evelyn said gently, "tell me about your life. Your profile mentioned you're a father." "Emma, she's 8. David's voice steadied when he talked about his daughter. "She's the best thing that ever happened to me. Smart as a whip, funny, wise beyond her years. And her mother." The question hung between them, and David saw something shift in Evelyn's expression when he hesitated. "Sarah died 2 years ago, cancer." "I'm so sorry." The words carried genuine warmth. "That must have been devastating." It was. "But Emma keeps me grounded, keeps me moving forward." David managed a small smile. "She's actually the one who convinced me to try online dating. Said I was getting too serious for my own good." "Smart girl." Evelyn's smile seemed more natural now. "What do you do for work?" "I own an auto repair shop. Well, inherited it from my father. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work." David caught himself before adding the part about struggling to keep it afloat. "What about you?" Your profile was a bit mysterious. Something flickered across Evelyn's face. Hesitation, calculation, perhaps regret. "I work in technology, software development, mostly business applications." The answer felt rehearsed, leaving David with the impression that she was editing herself just as much as he was. But before he could probe deeper, the waiter returned. "Have we decided on appetizers?" David scanned the menu quickly, his heart sinking at the prices. Even the simplest salad cost $30. He thought of the $5 in his wallet, the careful calculations that had brought him here. "The soup sounds perfect," he said, choosing the least expensive option. "Make that 2, Evelyn added, "and we'll share the artisan bread." Through the first course, they talked carefully around the edges of their lives. Evelyn asked about the auto shop with genuine interest, and David found himself describing the satisfaction of diagnosing problems, the puzzle-solving aspect that appealed to his methodical mind. "You always were good at figuring things out," Evelyn said. "I remember in Mrs. Henderson's class you were the only one who could explain calculus in a way that made sense. You helped me with English essays in return." David smiled at the memory. "You had this way of seeing patterns in literature that I completely missed." "Did you finish college?" she asked. 2 years at State. Had to drop out when my father got sick, help run the shop." David shrugged, trying to make it sound like ancient history rather than a door that still ached when he thought about it. "What about you?" "Stanford for undergrad, MIT for my master's." Evelyn's voice carried no pride. Just facts delivered like a weather report. David felt the gulf between them widen. Stanford, MIT. This woman belonged to a different world entirely. One where $5 budgets and overdue rent notices didn't exist. "That's incredible," he said, meaning it. "I always knew you were brilliant. You were one of the few people who seemed to notice." Evelyn's voice grew softer. "High school wasn't exactly kind to quiet girls with thick glasses and second-hand clothes. You weren't invisible to me." The words slipped out before David could stop them, carrying more weight than he'd intended. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment the successful woman disappeared, replaced by echoes of the girl he'd once known. "No," she said quietly. "You were always kind to me, even when it wasn't cool." The memory hung between them. David, stepping between Evelyn and 3 seniors who thought her lunch money would buy their entertainment. The way she'd looked at him afterward, grateful and surprised that anyone would notice her distress, let alone act on it. "You defended me," Evelyn continued, "more than once. I never forgot that." David felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No, they wouldn't have. Most people looked right through me." Evelyn studied his face intently. "You saw me when I felt invisible. That meant more than you probably realized." The waiter returned with their main courses, and David's anxiety spiked again. He'd ordered the least expensive entree, but even that represented a significant portion of his remaining money. He ate slowly, trying to make the meal last, hyper-aware of Evelyn's occasional glances. "David," her voice held a new note, something careful and probing. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Are you happy? With your life, I mean. Not just content or getting by, but actually happy." The question caught him off guard. David set down his fork, considering how to answer honestly without revealing the full scope of his struggles. "I'm happy when I'm with Emma," he said finally. "Happy when I can fix something for a customer who really needs it. Happy in moments, I guess. The bigger picture is complicated." "Complicated how?" David met her eyes, seeing genuine curiosity there, and made a decision to offer her something real. "Raising a daughter alone is harder than I expected. Some days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. But then Emma does something that reminds me why it's all worth it. You're a good father. I can tell just from how you talk about her. I hope so. She deserves better than I can give her sometimes." "Don't say that." Evelyn's voice carried surprising intensity. "Love matters more than money." Something in her tone made David look at her more closely. "You sound like you speak from experience." "I do." Evelyn's smile held shadows. "I learned early that having nice things doesn't guarantee happiness." They finished the meal in contemplative silence, both lost in thoughts that bridged the gap between past and present. When the waiter brought the check, David reached for his wallet with practiced casualness. Though his heart hammered against his ribs, the total was $87. David stared at the number, feeling the blood drain from his face. $87 when he had 5. The mathematics of humiliation played out in slow motion as he realized he'd miscalculated catastrophically. "I'll get this," Evelyn said smoothly, already reaching for her purse. "No." The word came out sharper than David intended. "I asked you to dinner." "I pay." "David, it's really not I pay." He pulled out his wallet, hands trembling slightly as he extracted the $5 bill. It looked impossibly small against the white tablecloth, a monument to his poor judgment and misplaced pride. Evelyn's eyes widened as understanding dawned. She looked from the $5 to David's face, seeing the shame and desperation he could no longer hide. "I'm sorry," David said quietly. I miscalculated. This is embarrassing. Don't apologize." Evelyn's voice was gentle but firm. "Let me handle this. I can't let you pay for our first date." "Why not?" "Because..." David struggled to articulate the complex web of pride and tradition that made accepting her help feel like failure. "Because that's not how this is supposed to work." "Says who?" Evelyn placed a credit card on the table with practiced ease. "David, it's just dinner. It doesn't change anything about who you are." But David knew it changed everything. The careful balance he'd maintained, the illusion that he could function in her world, had crumbled with mathematical precision. He was exactly what he'd feared she'd see, a man whose reach exceeded his grasp, whose $5 made him a pretender in places where real money spoke. "This isn't what I wanted," he said. More to himself than to her. "What did you want?" David looked up to find Evelyn watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I wanted to take you somewhere nice. I wanted to be the kind of man who belongs in a place like this. You do belong here. Your worth isn't measured by your wallet. Easy to say when you're not the one counting change for coffee." The words hung between them, raw and honest, and David immediately regretted his bitterness. Evelyn didn't deserve his frustration with circumstances beyond her control. "I'm sorry," he said. "That wasn't fair to you." "No, I'm glad you said it." Evelyn leaned forward, her voice quiet but intense. "I want to know the real you, David, not some version you think I want to see." The waiter returned, processed Evelyn's card with professional discretion, and disappeared again. David sat in his chair feeling exposed and foolish, wondering how he'd convinced himself this could work. "Thank you," he said finally, "for dinner and for not making this more awkward than it already is." "It's not awkward. It's honest." Evelyn smiled, and for a moment David glimpsed the girl he'd once known beneath the polished exterior. Honesty is refreshing. They walked to the parking area in comfortable silence, the evening air carrying the promise of autumn's deeper chill. David felt lighter somehow, as if revealing his limitations had freed him from the burden of pretending. "I had a good time tonight," Evelyn said when they reached the street where David had parked. "Despite the surprise?" "You mean despite discovering your date is basically broke?" "I mean, despite discovering that the boy I remember grew up to be exactly the kind of man I hoped he would." David studied her face in the streetlight, looking for signs of pity or polite dismissal. Instead, he found something that looked remarkably like admiration. "Would you like to see me again?" he asked, the question carrying more vulnerability than he'd intended. "Very much. But next time, let's do something that doesn't involve me accidentally bankrupting you." David laughed, the sound surprising him with its genuineness. "Coffee, then." "I can afford coffee." Coffee sounds perfect. They exchanged a brief, careful hug, and David watched her walk away, still trying to process the evening's revelations. Evelyn Chen, brilliant, successful, kind, had just paid for their dinner without making him feel small, and somehow wanted to see him again. As he drove home through neighborhoods that grew progressively less polished, David found himself smiling. Emma had been right about scary things being exciting things in disguise. The night had been terrifying, but it had also been the first time in years that he'd felt seen by someone who chose to look past his limitations to find something worth knowing. The worn wedding ring pressed against his chest as he pulled into his apartment complex. And for the first time since Sarah's death, it felt less like an anchor and more like a blessing, proof that he was capable of love and worthy of being loved in return. David arrived home to find Emma sitting at their small kitchen table, a drawing spread before her and crayons scattered like confetti. She looked up as he entered, her eyes bright with curiosity and the kind of hope that made his chest tight. "How was your date, Daddy?" David hung his jacket on the back of a chair, buying time to find the right words. How could he explain the evening's complexities to an 8-year-old? The recognition, the embarrassment, the unexpected kindness. "It was interesting, sweetheart. The lady turned out to be someone I knew from high school." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? Was she nice then too?" "She was. Very nice." David sat beside her, studying the drawing that had captured her attention. It showed 3 figures holding hands under a rainbow, him, Emma, and a woman, with long, dark hair, wearing what appeared to be a dress made of stars. "What's this one about?" "It's you and me and the nice lady from your date." Emma pointed to each figure with the serious attention she gave all important explanations. "I made her dress sparkly because Mrs. Rodriguez says successful women sparkle." David smiled despite the ache in his chest. "How do you know she's successful?" "Because you got nervous about money, which means she has more than us." Emma's matter-of-fact tone reminded him that children noticed everything, especially the things adults tried to hide. "But you still went, which means you thought she was worth being nervous about." Sometimes Emma's perceptiveness left him breathless. "You're very smart, do you know that?" "Mummy used to say I got your brain and her heart." Emma added another star to the woman's dress. "Did the lady remember you from school?" "She did. We were friends back then." "Good friends?" David considered this, remembering the quiet conversations in the library, the way Evelyn would light up when discussing books, her grateful smile when he defended her from bullies who mistook gentleness for weakness. "I think so." "I hope so," Emma nodded approvingly. "Are you going to see her again?" "Maybe, if she wants to." "She will." Emma spoke with the confidence of childhood, as if the universe operated according to simple rules about kindness and fairness. Nice ladies always want to see nice daddies again. David helped Emma finish her drawing and get ready for bed, their evening routine providing comfort in its familiar rhythms. As he tucked her in, she reached up and touched the chain around his neck. "Daddy, do you think Mommy would like the lady from your date?" The question caught David off guard. Emma rarely spoke about Sarah in the present tense anymore, but when she did, it carried special weight. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Because in my dream last night, Mommy said she sent someone to take care of us. And today you met someone you already knew, which seems like the kind of thing mommies in heaven would arrange." David's throat tightened. Emma's faith in cosmic benevolence remained unshaken, despite losing her mother at 6 years old. And he envied her certainty that the universe held plans larger than their small struggles. "I think your mommy would want us both to be happy," he said carefully. "Me too," Emma settled into her pillow with a satisfied sigh. "I think tomorrow is going to be a good day." After Emma fell asleep, David sat at the kitchen table with the stack of bills that had waited patiently for his attention. The numbers told their familiar story. Not enough money stretched across too many obligations. The electric bill carried a final notice. The rent would be late again, and Emma's school had sent home a form about the upcoming winter clothes drive. He pulled out his phone and stared at Evelyn's contact information, saved simply as Eve. Part of him wanted to text her, to extend the evening's connection into something more tangible. But what would he say? "Thank you for paying for dinner? Sorry for being poor. Looking forward to our coffee date in whatever establishment won't embarrass me." Instead, he opened his laptop and began researching scholarships for single fathers returning to school. It was a familiar ritual, one he'd abandoned and resumed dozens of times over the past 2 years. Maybe if he could finish his degree, find work that paid better than auto repair, he could build the kind of life where $5 dates weren't exercises in humiliation. The applications all required the same things: essays about goals and challenges, financial documentation, letters of recommendation. David had started these forms so many times he could recite the questions from memory, but something always stopped him from completing them. Fear of rejection, maybe, or the practical reality that school meant less time at the shop, less income when they could least afford it. Tonight felt different. Seeing Evelyn again had reminded him of the person he'd once thought he might become. Not wealthy necessarily, but educated, confident, capable of conversations that didn't revolve around transmission repairs and past due notices. He opened a new document and began typing. "My name is David Thompson, and I am a 33-year-old single father seeking to complete my bachelor's degree in education." The words came slowly at first, then with increasing momentum as he found his voice. He wrote about Sarah's illness and death, about choosing family over finances, about the daily reality of raising a daughter whose intelligence deserved better than his limited resources could provide. He wrote about Emma's dreams and his own deferred aspirations, about the satisfaction of teaching customers how to maintain their cars and wondering if that same satisfaction might extend to teaching children how to navigate literature or mathematics. The clock on his laptop showed 11:47 p.m. When he finally stopped typing, the essay was rough, honest to the point of vulnerability, and probably too long. But it felt true in a way that mattered more than polish. David saved the document and closed the laptop, aware that completing the application would require more courage than he'd mustered tonight. But it was a start, a small step toward the kind of future that might include coffee dates without mathematical anxiety. His phone buzzed with a text message. "Thank you for a lovely evening. I meant what I said about coffee. How about Saturday afternoon? There's a place called Brewster's on Maple Street that has excellent coffee and a children's menu if Emma would like to join us." Eve, David read the message 3 times, struck by her inclusion of Emma. Most women his age weren't eager to complicate first dates with 8-year-old chaperones, but Evelyn had extended the invitation naturally, as if meeting his daughter was a privilege rather than an obligation. He typed back, "Emma would love that. Fair warning, she asks a lot of questions and has strong opinions about everything. Sounds like someone I'd enjoy meeting. See you Saturday at 2? Looking forward to it. David plugged in his phone and prepared for bed, but sleep proved elusive. His mind kept returning to the evening's revelations. Evelyn's success, her kindness, the way she'd paid for dinner without making him feel diminished. There had been moments during their conversation when 15 years disappeared entirely, when he glimpsed the girl who'd sat quietly in the back of English class. Brilliant and overlooked and worthy of so much more than high school had offered her. Now she had everything high school hadn't given her: success, confidence, financial security. But she'd chosen to spend an evening with a man whose biggest accomplishment was keeping his daughter fed and happy despite circumstances that would have broken stronger. People, the worn wedding, ring pressed against his chest as he shifted position. And David found himself thinking about Sarah's final weeks. She'd made him promise to find love again, to give Emma the stable family she deserved. At the time, the promise had seemed impossible, A kindness offered to ease a dying woman's worries about the people she'd leave behind. "She'll need a mother," Sarah had whispered during one of their last coherent conversations. "And you'll need someone who sees how good you are, even when you can't see it yourself." David had promised because saying no to a dying wife felt unconscionable, but he'd never imagined he'd meet someone who might fulfill that promise. Certainly not someone from his past, someone who remembered him before grief and responsibility had worn away his rough edges and left him careful, cautious, afraid of hoping for more than basic survival. Saturday felt both impossibly distant and alarmingly close. 3 days to figure out how to present himself as a worthy companion for a woman who'd built an empire, while he'd struggled to keep a small auto shop afloat. 3 days to prepare Emma for meeting someone who might become important in their lives. David finally fell asleep thinking about coffee shops and children's menus, about second chances, and the possibility that sometimes the universe did arrange meetings between people who needed each other, even when they didn't realize how much they had to offer in return. The next morning brought its familiar rhythms. Emma's cheerful chatter over breakfast, the drive to school filled with her observations about everything from cloud formations to playground politics, the quiet satisfaction of work that required his hands more than his heart. But underneath the routine, David felt something new stirring. Hope maybe, or simply the recognition that his story wasn't finished, that chapters remained to be written beyond the narrow confines of survival and responsibility. Marcus noticed the change immediately. "You seem different today, boss. Less weighted down. Had a good evening yesterday. The date?" David nodded, surprised by how much he wanted to share the details with someone who might understand their significance. "She turned out to be someone I knew in high school," he said, adjusting the tension on Mrs. Patterson's fan belt. "Someone I'd lost touch with who remembered me kindly. That's good fortune." Marcus handed him the wrench he needed without being asked, their partnership refined by years of shared work. Sometimes the universe puts people back in our paths when we're ready to appreciate them properly. Maybe. David tightened the belt with practiced precision. "She wants to meet Emma on Saturday. Even better. Shows she's thinking beyond just dating you. She's considering your whole life." The observation settled into David's chest with quiet satisfaction. Evelyn's invitation had included Emma naturally, not as an obstacle to navigate, but as an important part of getting to know him. It suggested a maturity that went beyond surface attraction, a recognition that loving a single parent meant embracing the complexities that came with that role. The shop's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts, and Marcus answered with his usual professional courtesy. "Thompson's Auto Repair," Marcus speaking. David listened with half his attention while finishing Mrs. Patterson's repairs, but something in Marcus's tone made him look up. "I see. And this is regarding what exactly?" Marcus's expression had grown puzzled, then concerned. "He's right here, hold on." Marcus covered the phone's mouthpiece. "Boss, there's a woman on the line asking about our business license and insurance information. Says she represents a company that's interested in the property." David's stomach dropped. Property developers had been circling their neighborhood for months, buying up older buildings for conversion into high-end condominiums or trendy retail spaces. The kind of development that displaced long-time residents and businesses in favor of higher profits. He took the phone from Marcus, his voice steady despite the anxiety climbing his throat. "This is David Thompson. Mr. Thompson, this is Jennifer Walsh from Meridian Development. We're conducting preliminary research on several properties in your area for potential acquisition. I'd like to schedule a time to discuss your building and business. Our building isn't for sale. I understand that, but we'd like to explore options that might benefit everyone involved. Perhaps we could meet next week to discuss possibilities?" David's mind raced through implications and outcomes, none of them favorable for a small business that barely covered its expenses. "I'm not interested in selling, of course, but it couldn't hurt to hear what we're proposing, could it? Sometimes opportunities present themselves in unexpected ways. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Jennifer Walsh using the kind of persuasive language that made David feel like prey being circled by a predator who'd learned to smile. When he finally hung up, Marcus was watching him with concern. Development company. Meridian Development. They want to meet about opportunities. That doesn't sound good. David leaned against the workbench, feeling the weight of another challenge added to his already precarious balance. The shop was his father's legacy, his source of income, his identity. Losing it would mean starting over in a job market that favored younger workers with newer skills. But fighting developers required resources he didn't have. Lawyers, time, political connections. The kind of weapons that money could buy, that success could wield, the kind of tools that someone like Evelyn might possess. The thought surprised him with its clarity and disturbed him with its implications. Was he unconsciously hoping that reconnecting with Evelyn might provide solutions to problems that extended beyond loneliness and financial struggle? The possibility made him uncomfortable, suggesting motivations that felt manipulative and unfair. David pushed the thought away and returned to work. But it lingered at the edges of his consciousness, like a seed that might grow into something he didn't want to examine too closely. Saturday's coffee date had taken on new complexity, shadowed by questions about what he hoped to gain and what he had to offer in return. Emma's drawing that night showed the three of them again, but this time they stood in front of a building that looked remarkably like the auto shop. All of them smiling under a sun that wore a crown. When David asked about the crown, Emma shrugged. The sun looked happy, so I thought it should wear something special. Why is the sun happy? Because good things are happening for good people. Emma colored the crown yellow with careful attention to detail. Mrs. Rodriguez says the universe keeps score, and people who help others get helped back eventually. David hoped Mrs. Rodriguez was right. But he'd learned that the universe's accounting system operated on timelines that didn't always align with human need. Still, watching Emma add stars to the sun's crown, he found himself believing that Saturday might bring something good, even if he couldn't yet imagine what form that goodness might take. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp October sunshine that made everything seem possible. David had spent the morning helping Emma choose an outfit for meeting Daddy's friend, a process that involved trying on 4 different dresses and a serious discussion about whether her good shoes made her look too fancy. "I want her to like me," Emma said, studying her reflection in the bathroom mirror. "But I don't want to look like I'm trying too hard." "You could wear a paper bag, and she'd like you," David assured her, straightening her collar. "Just be yourself. Mrs. Rodriguez says being yourself only works if you're someone worth liking. Mrs. Rodriguez has never met you, or she'd know you're definitely worth liking." They arrived at Brewster's Coffee 15 minutes early, partly due to David's nervous energy and partly because Emma had insisted they needed time to scope out the situation. The cafe occupied a converted Victorian house, all exposed brick and mismatched furniture that managed to feel both sophisticated and welcoming. Emma claimed a table by the window, arranging herself with the careful attention she gave all important social occasions. "Daddy, what if she doesn't like coffee? What if she's one of those people who only drinks green tea and judges people who don't? Then we'll know she's not the right person for us," David said, though privately he wondered what other incompatibilities might reveal themselves. Last Tuesday's dinner had been carefully orchestrated around a meal and conversation. This afternoon would include Emma, whose presence would strip away any remaining pretense and reveal whether Evelyn could embrace the reality of dating a package deal. "There she is," Emma said, pointing toward the door with the subtle discretion of a traffic controller. Evelyn entered with the same quiet confidence David remembered. But today she wore jeans and a simple sweater that made her look younger, more approachable. She scanned the cafe until her eyes found theirs, and her smile transformed her entire face. "David!" "Hello!" She approached their table with easy grace, her attention shifting naturally to Emma. "And you must be Emma. I've heard wonderful things about you." Emma stood and extended her hand with the formality she'd been practicing all morning. "It's nice to meet you, Miss Chen. Thank you for inviting me to your coffee date." Emma was appropriately awed, but not intimidated. "This is like a house from a movie," she said, running her hand along the smooth banister of the staircase. "But it feels cozy, too." "Thank you. I tried to make it feel like a home, not just a house." The kitchen was David's favorite room, spacious but warm, with granite countertops that bore the subtle scars of actual cooking, rather than existing as mere decoration. Evelyn moved through the space with practiced ease, gathering ingredients for what appeared to be homemade pasta. "Can I help?" Emma asked, always eager to participate in adult activities. "Absolutely. You can help me make the sauce while your dad relaxes." David watched them work together, noting how naturally Evelyn included Emma in the process, explaining techniques and letting her add ingredients with the kind of patience that couldn't be faked. Emma responded with the enthusiasm she reserved for people who treated her as capable rather than cute. The meal that emerged was simple but perfect. Fresh pasta with a sauce that tasted of tomatoes and herbs, served with bread that Evelyn had somehow found time to bake earlier. They ate in the dining room with candles that Emma insisted made everything fancy but not scary fancy. As the evening wore on, David found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't experienced in years. Evelyn's home felt like a sanctuary from the constant calculations and worry that defined his daily life. Here, he could focus on conversation and connection, rather than whether they could afford dessert or if the electric bill would wait another week. But the comfort came with its own anxiety. This glimpse of how Evelyn lived highlighted the enormous gap between their circumstances. Her casual mention of the vacation home she rarely used, the artwork she'd collected from travels he'd never be able to afford, the subtle indicators of wealth that permeated every corner of her beautiful life. Emma fell asleep on Evelyn's living room couch while they cleaned up dinner, curled up with a contentment that spoke of feeling utterly safe. David watched her sleep while Evelyn finished loading the dishwasher, struck by how natural the scene felt, despite its impossibility. "She looks peaceful," Evelyn said, joining him in the living room. "She's had a good day. Thank you for including her, for making her feel welcome. Thank you for sharing her with me." "She's wonderful, David. You should be proud." They sat together on the opposite couch, careful to maintain a respectful distance. But David felt the pull of attraction and something deeper, the recognition of compatibility that went beyond physical chemistry. "I should probably get her home soon," he said reluctantly. "Of course. But David, could I ask you something?" "Sure. Would you let me help with something?" "Nothing dramatic, just there must be things that would make your life easier." "Small things." David stiffened, his defenses rising automatically. "I don't need charity. It wouldn't be charity. It would be friendship. People who care about each other help when they can. You barely know us. I know enough. I know you're a good man, raising a remarkable daughter under circumstances that would break most people. I know you work harder than anyone should have to work and still struggle to make ends meet. And I know I have resources I don't need, while you have needs I could easily address." The conversation felt dangerous, loaded with implications that could change everything between them. David understood that accepting help would shift the balance of their relationship in ways that might prove impossible to navigate. "I can't," he said finally. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't." Evelyn nodded, though disappointment flickered across her features. "I understand. But the offer stands. Whenever you might change your mind." They drove home through neighborhoods that returned them to familiar territory, Emma sleeping peacefully in her car seat, while David processed the evening's complexities. Evelyn had shown him kindness and inclusion, had welcomed Emma with genuine warmth, had offered help without judgment or condescension, but she'd also revealed the full scope of their different circumstances, making it impossible to ignore the practical challenges their growing connection would face. Could love bridge such enormous gaps in resources and lifestyle? Was it fair to either of them to try? That night, after tucking Emma into bed and listening to her sleepy declaration that "Evelyn is really nice and I hope we see her again soon," David sat at his kitchen table with the scholarship applications he'd started earlier in the week. The forms stared back at him, offering a potential path toward the kind of future where coffee dates didn't require careful budgeting, and dinner invitations didn't highlight his limitations. But completing them would require admitting things about his circumstances that he'd worked hard to keep private. Would mean asking for help in ways that felt uncomfortably similar to Evelyn's offer. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "David, this is regarding the conversation we had about your property. I wanted to follow up and see if you might reconsider meeting with us next week. Our offer could be quite generous. Jennifer Walsh, Meridian Development." David stared at the message, feeling the weight of pressures converging from multiple directions. The shop that represented his legacy and livelihood was under threat. Evelyn represented possibilities he wasn't sure he deserved or could sustain. Emma deserved more than his best efforts could currently provide. The scholarship applications waited on the table, patient and demanding. The developer's message blinked on his phone screen, urgent and unwelcome. Evelyn's offer of help echoed in his memory, generous and terrifying. David closed his eyes and tried to imagine Sarah's voice, tried to access the wisdom she might have offered in this moment of impossible choices. But all he could hear was Emma's sleepy voice saying, "I hope we see her again soon," and the recognition that hope itself had become both blessing and burden in his carefully balanced life. The following Tuesday brought news that changed everything. David was elbow-deep in Mr. Henderson's transmission when Marcus approached with an envelope bearing the official seal of Emma's school district. "This came for you, boss. Looks important." David wiped his hands on a rag before opening the envelope, expecting another fundraising request or field trip permission slip. Instead, he found a letter that made him read the same paragraph 3 times before the words made sense. "Dear Mr. Thompson, we are pleased to inform you that Emma Thompson has been selected to receive the Sarah Chen Memorial Scholarship for Academic Excellence. This full scholarship will cover Emma's educational expenses through high school graduation, including tuition for our accelerated learning program." David's hands trembled as he continued reading. The scholarship was comprehensive. Tuition, books, supplies, even transportation to a private academy known for nurturing gifted children. The kind of educational opportunity he'd dreamed of providing but never imagined affording. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, noting David's stunned expression. "Emma received a scholarship, full ride through high school at Riverside Academy. That's incredible, boss. You must be proud." David was proud, but also bewildered. He'd never applied for this scholarship, had never even heard of it. The letter mentioned Emma's teacher recommending her based on her academic performance and personal essay about overcoming adversity. But David couldn't recall Emma writing any such essay. He called the school immediately. "Oh, yes. Mr. Thompson," the admissions coordinator said cheerfully. Emma's application was quite moving. Her essay about helping her father after her mother's death really stood out to our selection committee. "When did she apply?" "Let me check. It was submitted 3 weeks ago. The application included all necessary documentation, transcripts, test scores, teacher recommendations. Everything was perfectly complete." David hung up, feeling more confused than grateful. Emma hadn't mentioned applying for scholarships, and she certainly couldn't have gathered transcripts and recommendations on her own. Someone had helped her, but who? That evening, he sat Emma down for a careful conversation. "Sweetheart, tell me about this scholarship." Emma's face lit up with excitement mixed with something that looked like guilt. "Isn't it amazing, Daddy? Now you don't have to worry about paying for my school anymore." "It is amazing, but I need to understand how it happened. Did someone help you apply?" Emma fidgeted with her homework, not quite meeting his eyes. "Mrs. Henderson helped me write the essay, and the nice lady from your coffee date helped with some of the other parts." David's stomach dropped. "Evelyn helped you?" "She said it wasn't helping. It was just making sure all the pieces got to the right places." Emma's voice grew smaller, sensing trouble. "Did I do something wrong?" David pulled Emma onto his lap, struggling to balance gratitude with the complicated emotions churning in his chest. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart, but I need to understand exactly what happened." The story emerged in pieces. Emma had confided in Mrs. Henderson about wanting to go to a better school so she could learn more advanced subjects. Mrs. Henderson had mentioned the conversation to someone who knew someone who worked at Riverside Academy. Emma had been encouraged to apply, with Mrs. Henderson helping her write the required essay, but the logistical details, gathering transcripts, submitting test scores, completing the complex application process, that had been Evelyn's contribution. Emma had mentioned the scholarship opportunity during their coffee date, and Evelyn had quietly ensured all requirements were met. "She said it was like solving a puzzle," Emma explained. "She's good at puzzles, and she wanted to help solve this one for us." David felt a complex mix of emotions, profound gratitude for Emma's opportunity, deep discomfort at accepting such enormous help, and something approaching betrayal that Evelyn had acted without discussing it with him first. "Are you mad at me, Daddy?" "No, sweetheart. I'm not mad at you. I'm proud of you for wanting to challenge yourself, and I'm grateful for Mrs. Henderson's help." "What about Evelyn? Are you mad at her?" David considered the question carefully. Was he angry, grateful, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd done without his knowledge or consent? "I need to talk to her about it," he said finally. He called Evelyn that evening after Emma had gone to bed, his emotions still unsettled. "David, hello. How are you? I need to talk to you about the scholarship." Silence stretched across the connection, and David could almost hear Evelyn gathering her thoughts. "I assume Emma told you about my involvement." "She did." "Why didn't you tell me you were helping her apply?" "Because I knew you'd say no, and Emma deserves that opportunity, regardless of your pride." The directness of her answer caught him off guard. "It's not about pride, isn't it? David, your daughter is brilliant. She tested into the 99th percentile in every subject. She deserves educational opportunities that match her abilities. I know she's brilliant. I'm trying to provide those opportunities within my means. But what if your means aren't enough? What if your pride costs Emma chances she'll never get again?" David felt heat rise in his chest. "So you decided to go behind my back?" "I decided to help a child who needed help, whose father was too stubborn to accept it. You had no right to make that decision for us." "You're right. I should have talked to you first. But would you have said yes?" David knew the answer, and his silence confirmed it. "I thought so," Evelyn said softly. "David, I understand why this is hard for you, but sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Easy to say when you're the one giving the help. Is it? Do you think it's easy for me to watch people I care about struggle when I have the resources to make a difference? Do you think I don't see how your pride might keep Emma from opportunities that could change her life?" The argument continued for another 20 minutes, both of them saying things they'd later regret. When David finally hung up, he felt exhausted and more confused than ever. Evelyn had overstepped boundaries, but she'd also secured Emma's future in ways he couldn't have managed alone. The next few days passed in uncomfortable silence. Emma asked repeatedly when they'd see Evelyn again, and David found himself making vague promises about soon, while privately wondering if their relationship could survive such fundamental disagreements about independence and assistance. Marcus noticed his distraction at work. "Boss, you've been checking that same transmission 3 times. What's eating at you?" David found himself telling Marcus about the scholarship situation, seeking perspective from someone who understood both his pride and his practical limitations. "So let me get this straight," Marcus said, when David finished explaining. "This woman, who you're sweet on, helped your daughter get a full ride to one of the best schools in the state, and you're upset about it? She went behind my back, did she? Or did she help a child who asked for help, while respecting the fact that you wouldn't have accepted it directly? Whose side are you on?" Marcus laughed. "Emma's side. And yours, even if you can't see it right now." "What do you mean?" "Boss, you work 16-hour days trying to provide for that little girl. You skip meals so she can have new shoes. You worry yourself sick about things like college funds and medical bills. And now someone comes along who can solve some of those problems and you're complaining. It's not that simple, isn't it? You're letting pride get in the way of your daughter's future. That evening, David sat in his kitchen with Sarah's recipe box open before him. Inside were hundreds of handwritten cards detailing everything from holiday meals to Emma's favorite cookies. Sarah had been meticulous about documenting their family traditions, wanting to ensure Emma would always have these connections to her mother. David pulled out the card for Sarah's famous chocolate chip cookies, Emma's favorite comfort food. As he gathered ingredients, he found himself remembering the conversations he and Sarah had during her final weeks. "Promise me you'll let people help you," she'd said during one of their late-night talks. "You're too proud for your own good, David. Emma's going to need more than you can provide alone. I can take care of us. I know you can. But taking care of someone doesn't mean doing everything yourself. It means making sure they get what they need, even if that means accepting help." At the time, David had focused on the part about finding love again, but now Sarah's words about accepting help echoed with new relevance. Was his pride really more important than Emma's education? Was maintaining his independence worth limiting his daughter's opportunities? The cookies were cooling on the counter when Emma emerged from her room in her pajamas, drawn by the familiar scent. "Mommy's cookies," she said, climbing onto her stool beside the counter. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion. Just wanted to make something special for my special girl." Emma studied his face with 8-year-old perceptiveness. "You look sad, Daddy. Are you still upset about the scholarship?" David lifted Emma onto his lap, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I'm not upset about the scholarship, sweetheart. I'm proud of you for earning it. Then why haven't we seen Evelyn lately? Did you have a fight?" "We had a disagreement about how adults should handle certain situations." "About the scholarship?" David nodded. "I'm sorry. I know I should have told you sooner." "Sooner?" David turned to face her, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "You should have told me immediately. You should have said, 'By the way, David, I'm actually incredibly wealthy, and I own the company that's been threatening you, but don't worry about it anymore.' Would that have made things better? Would you have been able to see me as just Evelyn, instead of as a solution to your problems?" The question hit closer to home than David wanted to admit. Would he have been able to maintain his emotional independence if he'd known about her wealth from the beginning? Would their relationship have developed naturally, or would it have been poisoned by the power imbalance? "That wasn't your decision to make." "You're right. It wasn't." Evelyn's voice was quiet, defeated. "I made a terrible mistake because I was afraid of losing something I'd just found." "What else have you lied about?" "I haven't lied about anything else. My feelings for you are real. My love for Emma is real. Everything between us has been genuine except for this one omission." "One omission?" "Evelyn, you're not just wealthy, you're rich beyond anything I could have imagined. You could buy and sell my entire neighborhood without blinking, and you let me worry about $5 coffee dates, while you were probably worth more than I'll earn in my lifetime. Money doesn't matter to me the way you think it does." "Easy to say when you have it." They stared at each other across the living room, the gulf between them wider than it had ever been. David felt the careful trust they'd built dissolving, replaced by questions about every interaction, every gesture, every moment of connection. "The scholarship," David said suddenly. "How much of that was manipulation?" "None of it. Emma earned that scholarship based on her abilities. I just made sure the right people noticed her application, because you could. Because you have the kind of connections and influence that can change a child's life with a few phone calls." "Is that wrong? Should I have let her opportunities depend on chance when I could help ensure she got what she deserved?" "You should have been honest with me about who you are and what you're capable of." Evelyn stood, gathering her purse with the careful dignity of someone trying not to fall apart in public. "You're right. I should have trusted you with the truth instead of trying to protect what we were building. I was wrong and I'm sorry. Where are you going?" "Home. You need time to process this, and I need to figure out how to make amends for the mess I've created." "Evelyn, wait." David felt a moment of panic at the thought of her leaving. Despite his anger, despite the betrayal, the idea of losing her entirely felt devastating. What? I don't know how to move forward from this. I don't know how to trust someone who could solve all my problems, but chose to let me suffer instead. I wasn't letting you suffer. I was trying to figure out how to help without destroying what we were building, by lying to me for months, by being afraid that the truth would make you see me differently, that you'd either reject me completely or only want me for what I could provide. The admission hung between them, raw and honest in a way that cut through David's anger to touch something deeper. He recognized the fear she described, because he'd experienced it himself, the terror that connection might be based on need rather than genuine affection. I need time, he said finally. I understand. After Evelyn left, David sat in his empty living room trying to reconcile the woman he'd been falling in love with and the corporate mogul he'd discovered. Was the gentle, caring person who helped Emma with homework real? Or was she another persona adopted for this particular acquisition? He thought about all their conversations, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But what he found instead were moments of genuine vulnerability. Her admission about feeling lonely despite her success, her tears when Emma first hugged her, her nervousness about meeting his approval. Those emotions couldn't be faked, could they? David's phone buzzed with a text from Emma's school. Reminder, parent-teacher conference tomorrow at 3 p.m. Looking forward to discussing Emma's exceptional progress. The message reminded him of another complication. How to explain to Emma that the woman she'd grown to love might not be a permanent part of their lives. How to process his own feelings when he wasn't sure whether heartbreak was appropriate or if he was grieving the loss of something that had never been real in the first place. The corporate acquisition notice still lay on the coffee table, a piece of paper that had changed everything. David picked it up and read it again, noting details he'd missed in his initial shock. The acquisition had been completed quickly, suggesting significant resources deployed specifically for this purpose. The timing, just days after their first date, supported Evelyn's claim that she'd acted to protect him, but it also confirmed the enormous power imbalance he'd never recognized. While he'd been carefully budgeting for coffee dates, she'd been acquiring entire companies. While he'd worried about paying rent, she'd been making decisions that affected the economic future of his entire neighborhood. David thought about Emma's drawings, about the future they'd tentatively begun planning, about the possibility of love that transcended different backgrounds. Was any of that salvageable? Or had Evelyn's deception poisoned everything they'd built? The questions swirled in his mind as he prepared for bed, knowing that tomorrow would require decisions about forgiveness, trust, and whether love could survive the revelation that his partner possessed power beyond his comprehension while choosing to keep him in. The dark about threats to everything he held dear, Sarah's wedding ring, felt heavier against his chest that night, a reminder of what love looked like when built on complete honesty and mutual vulnerability. Could he find his way back to that kind of trust with someone who'd proven capable of orchestrating his reality while maintaining the illusion of equal partnership? The answer would determine not just his own future, but Emma's relationship with the woman who'd become such an important part of her world. The stakes had never been higher, and David had never felt less certain about how to navigate the complexities of love, when complicated by wealth, power, and the fundamental question of whether good intentions could justify devastating deceptions. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of forced normalcy and underlying tension. David threw himself into work with renewed intensity, as if fixing every transmission and replacing every brake pad could somehow repair the trust that had been shattered. Emma asked about Evelyn daily, her 8-year-old heart unable to comprehend why the nice lady had suddenly disappeared from their lives. "Did you and Evelyn have a big fight?" Emma asked one evening, curled against David on the couch during their nightly reading ritual. "Adults sometimes have disagreements that are hard to explain," David said. Carefully, Mrs. Rodriguez says big fights usually happen when people care about each other too much. To be honest about scary things, David closed the book. They'd been reading, struck by the accidental wisdom. What else does Mrs. Rodriguez say? She says, when people love each other, they have to choose between being right and being together. Emma studied David's face with the intensity she reserved for important conversations. Which one did you choose, Daddy? The question haunted David through sleepless nights and distracted days. Which had he chosen? Was his anger about Evelyn's deception justified, or was he using her omission as an excuse to retreat from the vulnerability that real intimacy required? Marcus noticed his distraction at work. Boss, you've been checking that same oil change 3 times. Something eating at you? David found himself explaining the situation to Marcus, seeking perspective from someone who'd watched the relationship develop from the beginning. So let me understand this, Marcus said when David finished. This woman who you care about discovered a threat to your business and secretly bought the company to protect you. And you're upset about this? She lied to me for months, did she? Or did she try to figure out how to help you without making you feel small? Whose side are you on? Yours, which is why I'm asking if maybe you're letting pride get in the way of something good again. This is different than the scholarship. This is about trust. Is it? Or is it about fear that someone might actually have the power to solve your problems, which would mean admitting you need help, you can't provide yourself? The conversation echoed in David's mind as he drove home that evening. Was Marcus right? Was his anger really about Evelyn's deception, or about his own discomfort with the power dynamics her wealth created? At home, he found Emma at the kitchen table working on what appeared to be a Christmas list, though Thanksgiving was still 2 weeks away. Starting early this year? David asked, settling beside her. It's not for me, Emma said, showing him a carefully written letter. It's for Santa, but it's about you and Evelyn. David read the letter with growing emotion. Dear Santa, my name is Emma Thompson, and I am 8 years old. I have been very good this year, mostly. I don't want toys for Christmas this year. I want you to help my daddy and Evelyn stop being sad. They love each other, but they're scared about grown-up things. Daddy is scared that Evelyn is too important and has too much money. Evelyn is scared that Daddy won't love her if he knows how much money she has. But I know they both love me and I love them both. Can you help them remember that love is more important than money or being scared? Mrs. Rodriguez says you help families that belong together find their way back to each other. We belong together, Santa. Thank you. Love, Emma. P.S. If you can't fix the grown-up problems, I would like new art supplies. David's throat tightened as he finished reading. Sweetheart, this is very thoughtful, but grown-up problems are complicated. No, they're not. Grown-ups just make them complicated. Emma retrieved the letter and folded it carefully. Mrs. Rodriguez says love problems have simple solutions, but adults think too much instead of feeling with their hearts. That night, David couldn't sleep. Emma's letter had crystallized something he'd been avoiding. The recognition that his anger at Evelyn might be masking deeper fears about inadequacy and worthiness. Was he really upset about her deception, or about discovering how vast the gap was between their circumstances? Around midnight, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Evelyn's name, and David hesitated before answering. David, I'm sorry to call so late. Is Emma okay? She's fine. Why? I wanted to make sure she was all right. I know my absence has been hard on her. It has been. Silence stretched between them, filled with everything they weren't saying. David, can I ask you something? Yes. If you could go back to the beginning, knowing everything you know now, would you still want to build something with me? The question caught him off guard. I don't know. I understand. I miss you both. I miss being part of something that felt like family. After Evelyn hung up, David sat in his kitchen with Emma's letter and a cup of coffee he didn't really want. He thought about the question Evelyn had asked, about whether knowledge of her circumstances would have changed his feelings from the beginning. Honestly, probably. If he'd known about her wealth during their first coffee date, he might have been too intimidated to pursue anything meaningful. Her omission, while painful, had allowed their relationship to develop based on genuine compatibility rather than financial considerations. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the shop. James Morrison, the lawyer who'd helped David understand his rights regarding Meridian development, arrived during the lunch break carrying a folder of documents. "I have some information you might find interesting," James said, accepting the coffee Marcus offered. "About St. Clair Enterprises and their acquisition of Meridian Development." David felt his stomach clench. "What kind of information?" "The kind that might change your perspective on recent events." James opened the folder and spread several documents across the shop's small desk. "These are internal memos from Meridian Development, obtained through discovery in an unrelated case." David scanned the documents, his comprehension growing with each page. Meridian had targeted his neighborhood. What kind of meaningful work? "I've been thinking about that. What if we used my resources and your community connections to create something that mattered? What if we found ways to help families like yours without making them feel diminished?" The idea intrigued David despite his reservations. "What did you have in mind?" "Scholarship programs, small business support, community development that serves residents instead of displacing them. Projects where your expertise in human relationships guides how we deploy financial resources. You'd want me to help direct your charitable giving. I'd want us to build something together that neither of us could create alone." David found himself imagining the possibilities. Programs that addressed real needs without creating dependency. Initiatives that strengthened communities rather than gentrifying them. Work that combined Evelyn's resources with his understanding of working-class families. "I need to think about all this," David said finally. "Of course. But David, I hope you'll consider that some problems are too big for pride to solve. Sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, it's strategy." After they hung up, David sat in his kitchen reading Emma's letter to Santa one more time. His daughter had seen something he'd been too afraid to acknowledge, that love required courage, and courage sometimes meant accepting that partnerships involved unequal resources deployed for mutual benefit. The corporate acquisition document sat beside the letter, evidence of how Evelyn's wealth had already protected their family in ways he'd never recognized. Maybe the question wasn't whether he could trust someone with that much power, but whether he could trust himself to remain authentic in a relationship where resources weren't equally distributed. Emma emerged from her room in her pajamas, drawn by the sound of papers rustling. "Daddy, are you reading my letter?" "I am. It's very wise. Did it help you think about things differently?" "It did." Emma climbed onto his lap with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her welcome. "Mrs. Rodriguez says Christmas miracles happen when people stop being afraid of getting what they really want." "What do you really want, sweetheart?" "For our family to be together. All three of us." Emma looked up at him with eyes that held Sarah's wisdom and his own stubborn hope. "What do you really want, Daddy?" David held his daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and considering the question seriously. What did he want? Beyond security and stability, beyond the practical concerns that dominated his daily life, what did his heart actually desire? "I want to build something beautiful with someone I love," he said finally. "Something that honors your mother's memory while creating new possibilities for our future." "That sounds like Evelyn to me," Emma said with 8-year-old certainty. Maybe it did. Maybe love wasn't about equal resources or identical circumstances. Maybe it was about choosing to build something larger than what either person could create alone, even when that required navigating uncomfortable realities about power and privilege. David thought about Christmas miracles and second chances, about the courage required to accept love that came with complications. Tomorrow he would need to decide whether his pride was more important than Emma's happiness, whether his fears about adequacy mattered, more than the possibility of building something extraordinary with someone who'd already proven her commitment to their family. The next morning brought an unexpected crisis that would force David's hand in ways he hadn't anticipated. He arrived at the shop to find Marcus standing in the parking lot, staring at a notice posted on their front door. "Boss, you need to see this." The notice was from the city's building inspection department, ordering an immediate cessation of all business activities pending a comprehensive safety evaluation. The document cited multiple violations: electrical systems, ventilation, structural integrity, and demanded costly upgrades before reopening would be permitted. "This is impossible," David said, reading the violations list. "We just passed inspection 6 months ago." "That's what I thought." Marcus pointed to the signature on the notice. "But look who signed it." David's blood ran cold as he recognized the name: Thomas Walsh, city building inspector. "The same surname as Jennifer Walsh from Meridian Development. They're related," David said, understanding flooding over him. "Has to be. And I bet if we dig deeper, we'll find this inspection was requested by someone with connections to the old Meridian management." David felt the weight of the situation settling over him. Even though Evelyn owned Meridian now, the company's former employees still had connections, still harbored resentment about their thwarted development plans. Someone was using insider knowledge to continue the harassment through different channels. The estimated cost of addressing the violations was staggering: nearly $40,000 for upgrades that were clearly unnecessary and probably illegal. Money David didn't have, couldn't borrow, and couldn't raise without selling everything his father had built. "What are our options?" Marcus asked. "Fight it through proper channels, which could take months and cost almost as much as compliance. Or find a way to pay for the upgrades and reopen quickly. Or call Evelyn." David looked at Marcus sharply. "What?" "Boss, this is exactly the kind of situation where having powerful friends matters. You could probably resolve this with one phone call." "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because of pride. Because asking for help feels like failure." Marcus stepped closer, his voice growing urgent. "David, this isn't about your relationship with Evelyn anymore. This is about whether Emma gets to keep her father's legacy or watches it disappear, because he was too stubborn to accept help." The words hit David like physical blows. Marcus was right. This had moved beyond personal pride into territory that affected Emma's future. The shop wasn't just his livelihood. It was the foundation of their financial security, the source of her college fund, the tangible link to the grandfather she'd never known. David pulled out his phone and stared at Evelyn's contact information. One call could probably resolve everything. One admission that he needed help could save his business, protect his daughter's inheritance, and preserve the work his father had spent a lifetime building. But it would also confirm every fear he'd harbored about their relationship. That he needed her more than she needed him. That their partnership was built on dependency rather than mutual support. "I need to think about this," David said. "Boss, with respect, we don't have time to think. Every day we're closed, we're losing customers to competitors. Every day we delay addressing these violations, they get more expensive to fix." That afternoon, David drove to Emma's school for their scheduled parent-teacher conference, his mind churning with impossible choices. Mrs. Henderson's classroom felt like a sanctuary, filled with children's artwork and the smell of crayons and possibility. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming. I have wonderful news about Emma's progress." For the next 30 minutes, David listened to detailed reports about his daughter's exceptional academic performance, her leadership qualities, her kindness to struggling classmates. Emma was thriving at Riverside Academy, challenging herself with advanced coursework while maintaining the empathy and wisdom that made her special. "We've known each other for 15 years. We've just been getting reacquainted for 3 months. You're proposing a business partnership and marriage at the same time. I'm proposing a life together that includes shared work toward common goals." David took the ring box from her hands, studying the simple band that somehow managed to capture both elegance and understated beauty. "It's perfect. Does that mean yes?" "It means I'm terrified and excited and completely in love with you despite my better judgment. Is that a yes?" David looked up from the ring to meet her eyes. "Yes, Evelyn St. Clair, I'll marry you. I'll build a business with you. I'll figure out how to be worthy of the kind of partnership you're offering." "You're already worthy," she said, tears forming in her eyes. You've been worthy from the moment you defended a shy girl from bullies when no one else cared enough to notice. David slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that carried 15 years of lost time and the promise of shared tomorrows. When they broke apart, Marcus was standing in the doorway of the shop, grinning broadly. "About damn time," he called out. "Linda owes me $20. You were betting on us." David asked. "Boss, everyone was betting on when you'd finally propose. Though technically she beat you to it, so I'm not sure who wins the pool." Evelyn laughed, her professional composure completely abandoned in favor of the joy of a woman who'd just gotten engaged to the man she loved. "We both win." That afternoon, they drove together to pick up Emma from school, the engagement ring catching light from the car window as Evelyn navigated traffic. David felt simultaneously overwhelmed and deeply peaceful, as if all the scattered pieces of his life had suddenly arranged themselves into a picture that made perfect sense. "Are you nervous about telling Emma?" Evelyn asked. "Are you kidding? She's been planning our wedding since our second date. I'm more worried about her trying to take over all the arrangements. Would that be so bad? Have you seen how she organizes her art supplies? Everything color-coded and labeled. She'd have our wedding planned down to the minute." They found Emma waiting in the school pickup area, her backpack bulging with art projects and homework. She climbed into the car, chattering about her day, until she noticed Evelyn's hand on the steering wheel. "Evelyn." Emma's voice reached a pitch that probably alarmed dogs in neighboring counties. "You're wearing a ring! Did Daddy finally ask you to marry us?" "Actually," Evelyn said, glancing at David with amusement, "I asked him." Emma considered this development seriously. "That's very modern. Mrs. Rodriguez says modern women don't wait for men to figure out obvious things." "What else does Mrs. Rodriguez say?" David asked. "She says Christmas weddings are the most romantic, and that I should start practicing walking in fancy shoes because flower girls need to be graceful." "You want to be our flower girl?" Evelyn asked. "Of course! Who else would do it? Besides, I've been planning this wedding since Halloween. I have lists." David and Evelyn exchanged glances over Emma's head, both realizing their daughter had indeed been several steps ahead of them throughout this entire process. "Lists?" David asked. "Flowers, music, decorations, food, guest seating arrangements. Mrs. Rodriguez helped me think through all the important details." "When exactly were you planning to share these lists with us?" "When you stopped being scared and decided to get married, obviously." Emma pulled a notebook from her backpack and began flipping through pages covered with her careful handwriting. "I was thinking December 23rd for the wedding date, because that gives people time to plan travel but doesn't interfere with Christmas morning." Evelyn pulled into their apartment complex parking lot and turned to look at Emma directly. "You've really thought this through. I've been thinking about it since the first time I saw you and Daddy together. You make him smile the way Mommy used to, and you listen to me like my opinions matter. That's what families do." David felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Sweetheart, how do you feel about Evelyn becoming your stepmom?" "Happy, but also sad sometimes, because it means Mommy really isn't coming back." The honesty of the statement hit David hard. Emma had been so positive about their relationship that he'd sometimes forgotten she was still processing the loss of her first mother. "Loving Evelyn doesn't mean forgetting Mommy," he said gently. "I know, Mrs. Rodriguez says hearts are like houses. They have room for lots of people if you're brave enough to keep adding rooms." Evelyn reached back to take Emma's hand. "I would never try to replace your mommy, sweetheart. But I'd love to be another person who loves you completely and wants to help take care of you. That's what I want too," Emma said simply. That evening, the three of them sat around David's small kitchen table, planning a future that was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. The architectural drawings competed for space with Emma's wedding planning notebooks, creating a tableau that perfectly captured the complexity of what they were building together. "December 23rd is only 4 weeks away," David pointed out. "Is that enough time?" Evelyn asked. "Mrs. Rodriguez says simple weddings with big love are better than big weddings with simple love," Emma said, consulting her notes. We just need a pretty place, good food, and people who care about us. What about the business expansion? David asked. Construction, permits, equipment installation, that's months of work. We start with the building purchase and basic renovations, Evelyn said. Get you reopened quickly while we plan the larger expansion. James has already researched the permit process. You've been planning this for a while. I've been hoping for it since our second coffee date. David looked around his small apartment, at the evidence of their 3 separate lives beginning to merge into something larger and more complex. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator. Evelyn's engagement ring caught the kitchen light, and the architectural drawings promised a future where their shared dreams might actually become reality. This is really happening, he said, more to himself than to them. This is really happening, Evelyn confirmed, reaching across the table to take his hand. Good, Emma said with satisfaction, closing her wedding planning notebook. Now we can stop pretending we're not a family and start acting like one. Sometimes 8-year-olds understood things that adults took months to figure out. Looking at the 2 women who'd transformed his life from survival mode into something approaching adventure, David realized Emma had been right all along. They'd been a family since the moment they'd chosen to care about each other's happiness more than their own fears. Tomorrow would bring practical challenges about business, partnerships, and wedding logistics. But tonight, they could simply enjoy the recognition that love had indeed found them when they'd had nothing left to give. And it had remembered them from a time when they'd had everything to lose. 3 weeks later, David stood in the small chapel Emma had chosen for their wedding, adjusting his tie for the dozenth time, while trying to process how completely his life had transformed in such a short period. The building inspection crisis had been resolved within days of Evelyn's building purchase. The corrupt inspector quietly transferred to another department after James's investigation uncovered multiple ethics violations. You look nervous, boss, Marcus said, straightening his own formal attire with the awkwardness of a man more comfortable in work clothes. I am nervous. 3 months ago, I was counting my last $5. Now I'm about to marry a woman who owns half the city. You're about to marry a woman who loves you and Emma enough to want to build a life together, Marcus corrected. The money is just logistics. David checked his watch. 20 minutes until the ceremony. The chapel was small but perfect, chosen by Emma for its stained glass windows that cast rainbow light across the altar. She'd insisted that colorful light would make the wedding photos look magical, but not fancy fake. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of practical arrangements and emotional adjustments. The shop had reopened under new ownership, with David maintaining complete operational control while Evelyn handled the business development aspects. They'd hired 2 additional mechanics, installed updated equipment, and begun planning the community education programs that would launch in the spring. Emma appeared in the doorway, wearing a purple dress that honored Sarah's memory while celebrating their new beginning. Evelyn wants to see you for a minute. She says it's important, but not bad important. David found Evelyn in the small room where she'd been getting ready, and his breath caught at the sight of her. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that managed to be both elegant and understated. Her hair styled with the kind of effortless sophistication that spoke of professional attention without ostentation. You look incredible, he said. Thank you. You look terrified. I am terrified. But it's good terrified, not bad terrified. Evelyn smiled, some of her own nervousness showing through. I wanted to give you something before we do this. Something that belonged to my grandmother. That's exactly what makes it heroic. They were interrupted by Emma's voice from the living room. Are you 2 going to sit in the kitchen talking all night, or are you going to come open Christmas presents with me? It's past midnight, sweetheart, David called back. Christmas presents can wait until morning, but I have a special present for both of you that can't wait. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing her pajamas and carrying a wrapped package. I made this for your wedding, but Mrs. Rodriguez said I should save it for when we were all officially family. David and Evelyn exchanged glances, both touched by Emma's thoughtfulness. Okay, 1 present, Evelyn said. But then you need to sleep. Emma handed them the package with the ceremony reserved for truly important occasions. Inside, David found a photo album Emma had created, documenting their relationship from their first coffee date through the wedding preparation. She'd somehow obtained copies of photos from their phones, along with pictures she'd taken herself, creating a narrative of their growing family. The final page showed a photo someone had taken during the wedding ceremony, David and Evelyn exchanging rings while Emma beamed between them. Below it, Emma had written in her careful cursive, "The day we became officially what we'd been all along, a family that chooses to love each other." "Emma, this is beautiful," Evelyn said, tears forming in her eyes. "I wanted you to have something that shows how we got here. So when things get complicated, because Mrs. Rodriguez says marriage always gets complicated sometimes, you can remember that we chose each other for good reasons." David felt his throat tighten with emotion. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just stopped being too worried to notice." They spent another hour looking through Emma's photo album, reliving the progression of their relationship through her 8-year-old perspective. The pictures told a story of gradual trust, growing affection, and the careful construction of something precious. Finally, Evelyn carried Emma to her bedroom, while David checked the locks and turned off the lights. When they met in the hallway, both felt the significance of the moment, their first night as a legally married couple, their first evening as an officially complete family. "Thank you," David said as they prepared for bed. "For what?" "For seeing possibilities where I saw only problems. For loving Emma from the beginning. For being patient with my pride and fear. For making me believe I deserved this kind of happiness. Thank you for defending a shy girl from bullies 15 years ago, even though you barely knew her. For raising the kind of daughter who inspires people to be better than they thought possible. For teaching me that success without family is just expensive loneliness." They fell asleep in Evelyn's large bed, now their bed, listening to snowfall against the windows and feeling the deep satisfaction of people who'd found their way to something extraordinary. Despite the odds against it, David's last conscious thought was about the pocket watch in his vest pocket downstairs. About time spent loving never being time wasted. Tomorrow would bring the practical challenges of merged lives and shared responsibilities. But tonight, they could simply rest in the certainty that they'd chosen correctly, that love had indeed found them when they'd needed it most. Emma's photo album sat on the dresser, moonlight illuminating the final picture of their wedding day. 3 people who'd somehow figured out how to become a family despite starting from such different places, united by the recognition that some things were worth the risk of vulnerability, worth the courage required to build something beautiful together. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and challenge in equal measure. But they would face it together. David's integrity and community connections, Evelyn's resources and business acumen, Emma's wisdom and enthusiasm, combining to create something none of them could have achieved alone. Sometimes the best love stories weren't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone willing to build something perfect together. One decision at a time, one day at a time, one shared dream at a time. And sometimes, if you were very fortunate, that person turned out to be someone who'd been worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth believing in from the very beginning. 6 months later, David stood in the expanded community automotive center, watching Emma demonstrate basic engine maintenance to a group of teenagers enrolled in their summer youth program. The facility had grown beyond their original vision. 8 service bays, a fully equipped classroom, a customer education center, and a small business incubator that helped aspiring mechanics start their own enterprises. "She's a natural teacher," Evelyn said, joining him near the observation window that separated the classroom from the main workshop. "I wonder where she gets that," David smiled, noting how Emma commanded the attention of students twice her age through sheer enthusiasm and genuine knowledge. "She's been helping me explain repairs to customers since she was 6. I think she likes having a more formal audience. The program had exceeded all their expectations." What started as a simple community service initiative had evolved into a comprehensive educational center that attracted attention from urban planners and social service agencies across the state. They'd hosted delegations from 3 other cities interested in replicating their model. "The foundation board is meeting next week," Evelyn said, referring to the non-profit they'd established to expand their programs beyond the automotive center. "They want to discuss funding proposals for similar projects in Detroit and Cleveland. Are you ready for that kind of growth?" "Are we ready, you mean? This is our shared project, remember?" David nodded, still occasionally surprised by how naturally they'd learned to think in terms of partnership rather than individual achievement. The transition hadn't been seamless. They'd had arguments about resource allocation, disagreements about expansion timelines, moments when their different backgrounds created friction. But they'd developed systems for working through conflicts that honored both his community-centered approach and her business efficiency. Mr. Thompson called out Jake Martinez, one of their first program graduates who'd gone on to open his own motorcycle repair shop. "The diagnostic equipment is acting up again." David excused himself to address the technical issue, leaving Evelyn to continue observing Emma's class. By the time he returned, the teenagers were packing up their tools with the careful attention Emma had taught them, cleaning each item before storage, organizing components by size and function. "Next week we'll cover transmission basics," Emma announced, with the authority of someone who'd been around automotive repair her entire life. "Bring your questions about how gear ratios affect performance." As the students filed out, Emma bounded over to David and Evelyn with the excitement that still characterized her approach to everything interesting. "Did you see how Roberto figured out the alternator problem all by himself?" she asked. "He's going to be really good at this. You did excellent work teaching them," Evelyn said. "Your explanations were clear and patient. I learned from watching Daddy with customers. He always says that people can't take care of things they don't understand." The observation carried deeper wisdom than Emma probably realized. Understanding created empowerment, whether applied to automotive maintenance or life skills. Their entire program was built on the principle that education was the most sustainable form of assistance. That evening, the 3 of them sat on Evelyn's back deck, now their back deck, reviewing applications for their expanded scholarship program. Emma had appointed herself head of the selection committee, bringing 8-year-old logic to complex decisions about merit and need. "This girl from the South Side wants to study automotive engineering," Emma said, studying an application with serious attention. "She wrote about how her dad's car breaking down cost him his job, and she wants to help families keep their cars running." "That's exactly the kind of motivation we're looking for," David said, making a note on the application. "And this boy wants to start a mobile repair service for elderly people who can't get to regular shops. That's really smart, because Mrs. Rodriguez always complains about how hard it is to find reliable car help." Evelyn reviewed the financial documentation attached to each application, calculating how many scholarships their current funding could support. "We can approve 12 full scholarships this year, with partial funding for another 8 students. What if we added more funding?" David asked. "The center is generating enough revenue to be self-sustaining now. Could we expand the scholarship budget?" "We could, but I'd rather build sustainable growth than overextend our resources. Better to fully support 20 students than partially help 40. It was the kind of practical wisdom that had made their partnership so effective. David's instinct was often to help everyone who needed assistance, while Evelyn balanced generosity with long-term sustainability. Together, they'd created programs that were both generous and responsible. "I have an idea," Emma said, looking up from the applications. "What if the older students mentored the younger ones? Like the people who graduated from our program could help teach new students." David and Evelyn exchanged glances over Emma's head. Once again, their daughter had identified an opportunity they'd missed. "That's brilliant," Evelyn said. "Alumni mentorship would extend the impact of our investment, while creating ongoing community connections." Plus, it would give graduates a way to give back without having to donate money they might not have. David added. Emma beamed with pride at having contributed to their planning process. I'm really good at thinking about how to help people, aren't I? You're exceptional at it, David confirmed. Which is why we're considering recommending you for the accelerated social work program when you start high school. Really? Emma's eyes widened with excitement. I could study how to help families professionally. You could study anything you want, Evelyn said. But you do seem drawn to work that makes a difference in people's lives. As they finished reviewing applications, David reflected on how dramatically their circumstances had changed since that nervous first date 6 months earlier. The auto shop had evolved into a community resource center. Their family had grown from 2 to 3 members who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. His relationship with Evelyn had deepened into the kind of partnership that enhanced both their individual strengths. I have something to show you, Evelyn said, producing a folder from the stack of papers beside her chair. The architect finished the designs for the Detroit expansion. David studied the drawings, noting how they'd adapted their successful model to fit a different urban context. The Detroit Center would be larger, incorporating programs for renewable energy vehicle maintenance and electric car charging infrastructure. This is incredible, David said. But it's also intimidating. Are we really ready to manage projects in multiple cities? That's why we're hiring regional directors who understand their local communities. We provide the framework and funding. They provide the cultural expertise and community connections, like franchising, but for social programs. Exactly. Sustainable expansion that maintains quality while respecting local differences. Emma studied the architectural drawings with the interest she'd inherited from both her parents. Will kids in Detroit get to learn the same things our kids learn here? Similar things, adapted for their specific needs and interests, Evelyn explained. Every community has different challenges and different strengths. That makes sense. Mrs. Rodriguez says you can't solve everyone's problems the same way because people are different. The conversation continued as the evening light faded, covering topics from program evaluation to family vacation plans. David found himself marveling at how naturally they'd learned to integrate personal and professional discussions, how Emma had become a genuine contributor to their planning process. The Community Automotive Center was just the beginning. Their foundation had approved funding for programs in 3 additional cities, with inquiries from a dozen more. Emma's college fund was secure, funded through a trust that would support her education, regardless of their business success. The shop that had barely survived 6 months earlier now employed 12 people and generated enough revenue to fund their charitable programs. But beyond the measurable achievements, David felt the deeper satisfaction of having found his purpose. Not just surviving or even thriving individually, but contributing to something larger than himself through partnership with people who shared his values. Thank you, he said to Evelyn. For what this time? For seeing potential where I saw only problems. For loving Emma as your own daughter. For teaching me that accepting help isn't weakness, it's strategy. For showing me what partnership looks like when both people bring their best efforts towards shared goals. Thank you for defending a shy girl from bullies when no one else cared. For raising the kind of daughter who makes everyone around her want to be better. For showing me that money is just a tool, but integrity and compassion are treasures. For building something with me that neither of us could have created alone. Emma's voice drifted from her bedroom. Are you two going to stay up all night being mushy? Or are we going to get enough sleep to visit the new students tomorrow? David and Evelyn laughed, recognizing that their daughter had developed an uncanny ability to interrupt their most romantic moments with practical observations. We're coming, sweetheart, Evelyn called back, as they prepared for bed. David caught sight of their reflection in the bathroom mirror. 2 people who'd found their way to love through honesty about their limitations and courage about their possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve their community, new chances to model for Emma what healthy adult partnerships looked like. But tonight, They could rest in the satisfaction of having built something beautiful together, something that honored the past while creating hope for the future. Love had indeed found them when they'd had nothing left to give, and it had remembered them from a time when they'd had everything to lose. Sometimes the best love stories weren't about perfect people finding each other, but about imperfect people choosing to build something perfect together. One decision at a time, one challenge at a time, one shared dream at a time. And sometimes, if you were very fortunate, that choice led to the kind of life where helping others became the highest form of helping yourself, where partnership became the foundation for impact that rippled far beyond your own happiness. In Emma's room, David found her already asleep, clutching the latest addition to her art collection, a drawing of their family standing in front of the automotive center, surrounded by all the students and community members whose lives they'd touched. At the bottom, in her careful cursive, she'd written, "Love multiplies when you share it." 8-year-old wisdom, as usual, cutting straight to the heart of what mattered most. David kissed his daughter's forehead and whispered, "Sweet dreams, sweetheart. Tomorrow will help more people discover what they're capable of." And in that moment, surrounded by the evidence of love that had grown into service that had grown into legacy, David understood that sometimes the most beautiful endings were actually beginnings in disguise, beginnings of the next chapter in a story that would continue long after the final page was written.